include Michigan, Minnesota, New Hampshire, Texas, Wisconsin, and the all-important Pennsylvania. Zero in on Pennsylvania right now because Donald Trump was able to narrowly win that state's 20 electoral votes. That was back in 2016. And of course, that victory was integral in carving a path to the presidency. But this year, it appears as though the state is up for grabs yet again. Mike Armstrong joins us now. He's in Philadelphia. Mike, the recent poll suggests that tight race could take a long time to call, but you also wrote an analysis piece where you spoke to a lot of voters there. Tell us about some of the insights.
Well, speaking of voters, I'll tell you, one of the things that I found traveling across 5 or 6 states over the last 3 weeks, speaking to literally hundreds of people, I've been struck by the number of people, how few people have changed their opinion since the last time around. I don't think we met a single person out of the hundreds who's changed their opinion, who's going to be voting differently. That seems surprising to me. And it's interesting because it appears there's going to be considerably more people voting. It's almost as though the people that sat out the last election are going to decide this one.
Now, what is the atmosphere like there? I know the business owners, boarded up windows, of course, out of concern. This is the first time they've had to board up windows this year. What's happening there now?
There were big lines early on this morning. People lined up an hour before the polls even opened. After they opened, things moved quite quickly, and we visited 7 different polling stations today. I would say all of them, the wait was probably a minute, 2 minutes, not much more than that. The counting is going on, and depending on which county you're in, they aren't going to start counting those mail-in ballots. Some, they've begun processing them today, but they only start counting them tonight once the polls close. Others, they're going to start processing them today. Others are only going to start counting them tomorrow. The Secretary of State here in Pennsylvania hopes to have all those ballots, or most of them, counted by Friday. You can say that, but they're still going to be receiving ballots right up until Friday at 5 p.m., and those have to be counted as well. And by the way, those mail-in ballots, it's an interesting process. Those envelopes, they're double envelopes. The first envelope has to be opened, the information checked, then the second envelope has to be opened, and then it gets scanned. It's quite a process. It's going to take some time for us.
It takes some time to go through 2.5 million of those that have been returned in that state. Mike Armstrong, thank you so much. Now, since the winner of the election could come down to these mail-in ballots, there's concern that the results could be contested. That's particularly because Donald Trump has refused to say he will accept the results, while consistently saying that mail-in voting could lead to a rigged election. Mercedes Stevenson joins us now. She's in Ottawa. Mercedes, you've covered many elections, Canadian, American. It's been a rocky ride for Canada-U.S. relations for the past 4 years. Talk to me about what the federal government has been saying today about tonight's vote.
Well, very little, Farah, which has been their way of handling this throughout the election. The last thing they want to be seen as doing is meddling or taking a side when there is an unclear result potentially, and at this point, we don't know the result. They have to be able to get along with either a Biden presidency or another term of Trump. And while there's no question that Trump has been difficult for this government to deal with, and we've seen repeated implementation of tariffs, allegations Canada was a national security threat when it came to things like steel and aluminum that really shocked the government. They've gotten used to dealing with Donald Trump. They know who to talk to in this administration, who can bend the presidency or who can talk him down. So the advantage to the government, if it remains a Trump presidency, is that they know it will likely be more of the same, although it may be a little bit more gloves off in a second term. If it is a Biden presidency, a lot of folks think that'll be easier, but they will have to establish a relationship there, and they will have to deal with Biden being an economic nationalist in a lot of ways. That protectionism could be similar to what we've seen with Trump. So certainly the government watching very, very closely. I know the Prime Minister is surrounded by his closest advisors tonight as they figure out how to respond and also when to respond, because they will want to be sure they are dealing with the final result.
Mercedes, let me ask you this. Regardless of who wins tonight, what do you think is likely to be the biggest issue right now on the U.S.-Canada file?
Well, no question is COVID-19 and the border. This is the issue that regardless of who the president is, Canada has to deal with. Acquiring personal protective equipment, making sure that we have access to a vaccine, and managing the border, which has now been closed since March. That is historic, and there's been increasing pressure, not just at the presidential level, but at the gubernatorial level to reopen that border. So that is going to be the number one issue. But I think, Farah, if there is a Biden win tonight, Keystone XL would figure very prominently as well. Mr. Biden has promised that one of the first things he would do getting into office is to cancel that pipeline. The Liberal government has said they back it, and it could have very serious economic consequences for Alberta if that's the case.
Absolutely, such a big issue there. All right, thanks so much, Mercedes Stevenson. Thank you for your perspective and analysis. It is time now to take a short break, but coming up, how the various outcomes in tonight's election could impact trade relations with Canada. You're watching America Votes 2020 on Global News. It's the People You Trust app. Good evening and thanks for joining us. The best national and local news app.
We begin tonight with the COVID-19 pandemic.
The 24-hour live streams app.
Our big this afternoon.
The latest headlines app. Please stay home. The events that change our world app.
Together, we can get through even the darkest of times.
One app's got it all. The new Global TV app with 24/7 global news. Download now and stream anytime, absolutely free.
The Morning Show with Jeff MacArthur and Carolyn McKenzie.
I feel like we're family now.
And the secret of acting is not getting caught doing it.
My secret is Watkins.
Weekdays at 9 on Global.
Whether reporting news from the field or anchoring it from the studio,
This is the first trade war.
she's been a trusted Canadian storyteller for more than 20 years. Global National with Robin Gill. Weekends on Global.
The results of this election will undoubtedly have implications on relations between Canada and the United States, specifically when it comes to trade between the two nations. Of course, the U.S. is Canada's largest trading partner. However, the past 4 years have been tumultuous at points. Specifically, the need to renegotiate NAFTA, the supposed trade war following aluminum tariffs, and even a threat to withhold PPE in the early stages of the pandemic. Scotty Greenwood is the CEO of the Canada American Business Council and a former U.S. diplomat in Canada. She joins us now from Washington. Great to see you, Scotty. First up, tell me how the trade relationship between the U.S. and Canada has changed over the past 4 years.
Well, it's good to be with you too, Farah, and welcome to Washington. The trade relationship has changed quite a bit over the last 4 years because of the renegotiation of NAFTA. So we're seeing tariffs back and forth between the renegotiation, but actually commerce has continued, which is important. And we have to remind ourselves it's the most prosperous trading bloc on earth.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. If Joe Biden, though, comes out on top here, do you believe that would result in a more dynamic relationship between the two nations?
Well, it would certainly return to regular order, return to normalcy, and we would not be on this edge of wondering if there's going to be either tariff or retaliation, or something aggressive coming out right now. So I do think that would be different.
Okay, Scotty Greenwood, thank you so much for your perspective.
Thanks so much.
We are now going to go to Tracy Tong. She is in studio for us. Tracy, we're starting to see some states being called.
That's right, Farah. Both Donald Trump and Joe Biden are now officially on the board. Kentucky was the first state to be called, and we are also seeing numbers starting to come in Florida. Let's bring in Eric Sorensen with the latest. Eric, what do you have for us now?
Well, the thing to look at is those two scoreboards right there, where Trump has picked up 8 electoral votes. That's in Kentucky. We take a quick look at Kentucky. This is a state that has gone Republican ever since the last time a Democrat won was Bill Clinton back in 1996. So this is no surprise. His lead isn't as big as you might expect at the end of the night. That could be telling. I mean, that could be one of the trends, is Biden making gains even in states where he loses. And then there's Vermont. This is just the opposite of Kentucky. Vermont has been voting for Democrats the last 8 elections going back to 1992. So no surprise. that Vermont has already been called for Joe Biden, even though we're not showing any votes there for them. The one we want to show you right now quickly, though, is Florida. They have counted a lot of votes, of the early votes already in Florida. And look at the numbers. They're already up to 5 million votes counted. And Joe Biden right now has a 3-point lead. Too early to make too much of it. I looked into one county, Hillsborough County around Tampa, just to get a sense of it. Biden's lead there is about 10 or 12. That is an area that Clinton won by 7. So it's one indicator that he might be, improving on some of the places where Hillary Clinton fell a little bit short last time. So Florida is one to watch very closely in the next while because it's such an important state and they are adding up their ballots very quickly here.
Thank you, Eric. And we knew that things were going to happen very quickly. But if the last U.S. election taught us anything, it's that we can expect the unexpected. Donald Trump's 2016 victory was a shock for many. Up until election night, national polls showed Hillary Clinton with a clear lead. Now in 2020, many are left wondering, can we trust the polls? And what, if anything, has changed? According to experts, one big mistake made by pollsters was not giving enough consideration to the education level of voters. In 2016, white voters with college degrees were more likely to support Clinton. That demographic also likely to participate in surveys. That caused an overrepresentation of college graduates in the polls, and thus an overestimation of support for Clinton. Now that more pollsters are collecting education data, the chance of making the same mistake should be reduced. Another big change that has been made is conducting more polls, an expensive decision that should mean more accurate results. And one thing to consider, while polls tend to be accurate when measuring public attitudes, they are less accurate when measuring public behaviors. So clearly the polls were off in 2016 as indicated by the results. Joining me now to discuss all of this is Clifford Young, President of Ipsos US Public Affairs. Clifford, good to see you tonight. Thank you for joining us. There are clearly, many cases in which there is a disconnect between what voters say they're going to do and what actually transpires on election day. So is there something pollsters may be missing this time that could result in numbers that don't correspond with aggregate polls? And if so, what?
Well, we can always be wrong, right? And as your spot suggested, we did have a methodological problem in 2016, which we corrected. We think we minimized the problem. I want to add something very important, that in 2016, the last 4 weeks leading up to the election, there was a trend towards Trump. And sometimes we can capture the trend, but we don't quite know where the results are going to land. This year, there's a lot of stability. Now, that's not to say that the results won't be different than the polls, but I think the operative word is stability, stability, stability. And I think probably we'll see the polls will perform better this year than they did in 2016.
Okay, and some people may still look at it and say that the similarities are there, certainly. How confident are you, though, that this year they are truly reflective of how this election will turn out?
Well, I'm not 100% confident, right? Because we're measuring what will happen, and that's difficult measuring the future. But I think we've minimized a lot of our problems. We did that based upon 2016. But like I said, there's always a potential of last-minute changes, not capturing exactly who's going to show up on election day. There might be a bias towards Trump. There might be another one towards Biden. But I think on the main and the whole, we should have a pretty good night. At the very least, I think we'll do a pretty good job of selecting the winner. But let's see. Obviously, that's to be determined.
Okay, and before you go, keeping those factors that you just stated in mind, and that these polls are a reflection and not a prediction, what does your latest data say about the presidential race?
Well, it's Biden at this point. And so at the national level, he's up by, if you take the average, by about 7 to 8 points. In the key swing states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Florida, he was up as well. Again, that's a snapshot in time. It's not necessarily what's going to happen on election day, but it's trending Biden and has been for a while.
Okay, thank you, Clifford, for your always intelligent insight. We will be chatting with you throughout our coverage, so don't go anywhere. That's Clifford Young from Ipsos. You are watching America Votes 2020, special coverage of the U.S. election. Farah Nasser is in Washington, D.C., and we will head back over to her after this quick break. Stay with us.
My mother mother's plea.
Just come home or call or something.
A father's instinct.
Things never made sense to me from day one.
And the police operation that finally uncovered the truth.
It sends chills, even to this day.
Crime Beat, Saturday on Global.
Take a look.
The morning show with Jeff MacArthur and Carolyn McKenzie.
Jeff and I can barely have a conversation on the show, let alone harmonize.
A full hour
Let me tell you something about homeschooling.
of star power.
I feel like we're family now.
I spent 2 days shooting the video and sucking in as much as I possibly could. And the secret of acting is not getting caught doing.
A secret is blockage.
Weekdays at 9 on Global. Want weather on the go? Pinpointed with the free Global News Sky Tracker weather app. Reliable, accurate, and easy to use. It's like having a direct line to a meteorologist. The Global News Sky Tracker weather app. Forecast calls for download.
Former U.S. President Barack Obama joined Joe Biden in Michigan over the weekend. That state went red in 2016, which at the time was a big upset. Can the Republicans hold on to power in the state of Michigan? We sent our Jeff Semple there. He's been there for a while now. He joins us from Detroit. You know, Jeff, what are you hearing tonight from the people of Michigan? Let's put polls aside. What are people saying?
Yeah, for our people here, like everywhere, of course, talking a lot about the pandemic and COVID-19. That is the number one issue in this state, though, depending on who you talk to, they are viewing that issue through a different lens. Democrats say their number one issue is to get the pandemic and the virus under control. Republicans say that their number one issue is to reopen the economy. And of course, we know the governor here in Michigan received a lot of criticism, including from President Trump, for her actions to lock down businesses and the economy in response to the pandemic early on, back in March and April, when Detroit was in fact one of the hardest hit cities in this country. We saw the governor's actions there prompting militia members here in Michigan to storm the Capitol building while it was in session. We saw that alleged plot to kidnap her by some militia groups. That sparked a lot of concern that some of those militia members might try to intimidate voters on election day. Here in Michigan, you are allowed to carry your firearm into the voting booth. The good news so far at this point is we have not heard any reports of any trouble so far at any of those stations.
Okay, Jeff Semple reporting. Thank you for that. And I should mention that Michigan Secretary of State says they might not have final tallies until Friday. 3.2 million ballots were returned, and according to the Detroit Free Press, 92% of the absentee ballots were returned this afternoon, so a lot of counting to do. Now, as we've touched upon this evening, there has been 4 years of, well, some disagreements between Canada and the United States. So joining us now to discuss that and give us a bit of a behind-the-scenes point of view is former Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall. Nice to see you. You spent some time in office in the early days of the Trump administration. So give us a government perspective on how the relationship between Canada and the U.S. changed over that period of time. All right, we are having a bit of a technical problem with Brad Wall, and that he was joining us from Regina. I will try to get that sorted out for you.
We've had a
but just some more
problem
information
for
you,
years.
just to clarify. 92% of absentee ballots were returned by this afternoon, and that happened in Michigan. So there's a lot of counting to do there. And of course, we are paying close attention right now to a few other states. Georgia, Florida, we know that those counts are going to come in. We're going to take a look with Eric Sorensen coming up shortly. Actually, we have him now. He's right here. Eric Sorensen joins us now. Any of those, I'm really curious about those two states particularly because, as we know, they will give us an indication perhaps on what we could see throughout the night. Eric.
Absolutely, Farah. For example, up in the Jacksonville area of Florida, because Florida is putting a lot of numbers up there right now. We can look at that board and just see what the total numbers are at the moment for Florida. But what's interesting is to see, so where are the gains and happening for either Trump or Biden? And in the Jacksonville area, that's Duval County, Biden leads there right now, and that was not something that happened in 2016. So here is the race at the moment in Florida. Trump had an early lead, but some of these bigger communities now are beginning to report. Hillsborough County, which encompasses Tampa, Right now, Biden has a lead in that area, just that specific area around Tampa, by about 12%. And that was one that Hillary Clinton won by 7%. So some of those kinds of gains that he's making there could be enough to tip this over if that happens at the end of the night. For the moment, he has a 2-point lead. That's not entirely surprising. It was expected that some of the early vote would be counted first. That's why we have so many votes counted already here, over 6.5 million already. So it's not surprising that Biden has a little lead here, but it is interesting to see that he is leading specifically in some places by a greater margin than did Hillary Clinton win those counties.
Okay, that is Eric Sorensen reporting. It's time now for a short break. We're going to have much more coming up. Thank you, Eric. In just 1 minute, we're going to throw it over to Global National anchor Donna Friesen with our continued coverage of tonight's election.
War? Nobody's going to go to war with China from far.
Time to get political.
But to tell China, hey, you better behave.
We're voicing the concerns of Canadians.
A lot of Canadians are worried, what might the president do if we're not on the same schedule?
On Canada's go-to Sunday political talk show.
Does that mean that you are banning all firearms that have semi-automatic capabilities?
The West Block with Mercedes Stevenson. Sundays on Global.
It's the People You Trust app. Good evening and thanks for joining us. The best national and local news app.
We begin tonight with the COVID-19 pandemic.
The 24-hour live streams app.
Partly cloudy sky this afternoon.
The latest headlines app. Please stay home. The events that change our world app.
Together, we can get through the darkest of times.
One app's got it all. The new Global TV app with 24/7 global news. Download now and stream anytime, absolutely free.
For COVID-19 information and breaking news anytime, here at home, across Canada, and around the world, stay connected to globalnews.ca and stream free 24/7 national and local news on the Global TV app.
Want weather on the go? Pinpointed with the free Global News Sky Tracker weather app. Reliable, accurate, and easy to use. It's like having a direct line to a meteorologist. The Global News Sky Tracker weather app. Forecast calls for download.
On this Tuesday night from Washington, D.C., America votes. The long lines,
They're determined to have their voices heard.
the restlessness for results, and a resolution.
The whole world is waiting.
Which states to watch, and the preparations for potential violence. Plus, how Canada is watching closely.
We're very dependent on the exports.
And adding a new layer to the advice about masks.
We're just learning again as we go.
The latest word from Canada's top doctor.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us from Washington, D.C. It is the end of a U.S. presidential campaign like no other, held in the midst of a pandemic as racial unrest simmers and the political divide is deep. Polls have now closed in a number of states. Results are coming in slowly. It's still very early, but AP, the Associated Press, that's where we're getting our data tonight, has called Kentucky for Donald Trump and the state of Vermont for Joe Biden. That means Trump now has 8 electoral college votes. Biden has 3. It takes 270 to win. That's the number we're looking for tonight. When all the votes across this vast country are counted, the world will know whether Joe Biden gets the keys to the White House or whether President Trump spends 4 more years there. The last of the voters cast their ballots today in person. Even Americans with COVID-19 were allowed to vote in person, though with special precautions, of course, some voting from inside their cars. More than 100 million Americans voted early. That is a record. Those ballots will take time to count, and the rules on counting vary from state to state. It's possible there will be no clear result tonight. President Trump has said people are entitled to a result tonight, though. This morning, he was asked if he would declare victory before the results are clear. This is what he said.
I think we'll have victory. I think the polls are, suppression polls, and I think we'll have victory. But only when there's victory. I mean, there's no reason to play games.
After that interview, Trump went to Arlington, Virginia to visit staff at his campaign headquarters. His Democratic rival, Joe Biden, began his day at Mass at a Catholic church in Delaware, and he visited the graveyard where his first wife,
His baby daughter and his son Beau are all buried. He then took off to battleground Pennsylvania for his final hours of campaigning. With me is our Washington Bureau Chief Jackson Prosco. Jackson, important to point out that unlike in Canada, there's no federal agency here that controls kind of the voting rules. Every state has its own rules, and that's going to lead to some confusion over the results, and some patience is going to be needed.
That's right, Donna. People tend to forget that, but rules vary greatly state by state and even county by county within a state. And what that means is the way the votes are counted, who gets to vote, even potential legal challenges are all going to vary wildly over the course of the next few days. We should also point out, though, that none of that is deterring Americans from voting in unprecedented numbers. Joe Biden visited his childhood home in Scranton, Pennsylvania, where he scrawled a message on the wall, "From this house to the White House, with the grace of God."
It's good to be home! Winning is easy. Losing is never easy. Not for me, it's not.
On a final visit to his national campaign office, Donald Trump insisted on knowing the winner before all the ballots are counted.
You have to have a date, and the date happens to be November 3rd. And we should be entitled to know who won on November 3rd.
Election day carries little promise of certainty for either man. Despite record-setting early voting, there were still long lines and long waits to cast ballots.
This is a very important election. It's going to change the history of our country.
It's so important for the young and old because we in a crisis right now.
Never before has election day looked like this. Up, bracing for the unknown. The National Guard units are on standby for the possibility of civil unrest, which may hinge on a result or the uncertainty of no result for days.
No sign of any violence at this point, Jackson. But where will the candidates be tonight, and do we expect to hear from them before the night is through?
That's part of what's so unprecedented about this election, Donna. The president's actually watching the results from inside the White House. That's not something you would typically see. He invited 400 guests. The final number may end up being smaller than that. It's not clear if he will speak to the nation. I think that depends on how the night goes. And Joe Biden's going to be watching the results with his family in Delaware before proceeding to a venue there where he's hoping to do a drive-in speech to the nation. But again, Donna, it depends on how the night goes. We might not hear from either if there's no clear winner.
I'm Jackson Prosco, thanks. Well, everyone wants to know the results tonight. We have nothing conclusive yet, but we are seeing some things shape up, especially in Florida, where polls are closed and counting is pretty quick. Eric Sorensen has been watching that and the results come in Florida. Eric, what are you seeing there?
We're seeing a lot of votes counted already, Donna. We're like more than 6 million on their way to more than 7 million votes counted in Florida already, and it's very close. Let's look at the board so we can look at it more closely. Joe Biden with a 1-point lead, 3.9 million, well, 3,963,000 to 3,849,000. You can see just how close it is so far. We looked at a couple of counties where Hillary Clinton had won last time. Hillsborough County around Tampa, for example. She won it by 7 points. Biden is leading there by 12. Maybe that's an indicator, hard to tell. It's too early to say because a lot of the early votes are going to be for Biden, probably because they were the early votes that were cast in this election before Election Day, and a lot of those were thought to be Democrats who were voting. So can't read too much into it, but it's a lot of votes already tallied in Florida. Let's also look at Georgia because it is another what is considered to be a battleground state in the Southeast, and it's also very close. And at the moment, Joe Biden has a narrow lead of about 4 points over Donald Trump, 51% to 47%, with not too many polls reporting. But you can see this looks like this could also be a very competitive state, in a state that is historically votes for the Republicans. And so we're going to see if there's been any kind of a shift down there. This would be bad news for Donald Trump if he were to lose either Florida or Georgia. If we can look at the overall map, and we'll see just how things stand right now, where polls have closed and where they have not. And here we are. And for example, you can see down in the south here, then you have Florida and Georgia already turning blue a little bit. Too early to say. We can tell you, though, that Kentucky has been called, as you mentioned, Donna. Vermont has been called, as well as West Virginia. So West Virginia has now been called for Donald Trump. So he has a lead in the electoral count at this point, 13-3. Donna?
All right. Watching Florida and Georgia closely at this point, Eric Sorensen, thanks. Pennsylvania could be the tipping point for both Trump and Biden. That's why both candidates spent time there in the final days of this campaign. President Trump has repeatedly claimed without any evidence that there would be widespread voter fraud in Philadelphia. Our Mike Armstrong is there tonight.
Philadelphia's mayor told people headed to the polls to bring a mask and patience. The lines built even before polls opened. They thinned out as the day went on, but it's been clear people want their voices heard.
I'm just voting because Donald Trump, man, he for the white people, you know what I mean?
I'm hoping for some healing of the country in some capacity. This has been exhausting.
With 20 electoral college votes at stake in Pennsylvania, this state has been the main focus for both campaigns for days. Donald Trump eked out a victory here in 2016 by less than 1%. The Biden campaign sees that as flippable, while the Trump campaign has lost ground in some neighboring states and sees Pennsylvania as still competitive. But even here, Trump is down in the polls by about 5%.
Well, that's a nice vote. That's 16-13.
The president went on Fox News this morning to once again blast the city of brotherly love. For more than a week, at just about every rally, he rails about the potential for electoral fraud.
Governor, open up your state and please don't cheat, Governor. Please don't cheat.
There has been pushback from the state's attorney general, who's accused Trump of actively trying to undermine the election. Well, on the streets today, one of the things you hear over and over is a wish for one thing tonight.
Peace and no, looting, rioting, anything like that.
Some are bracing for unrest no matter what happens in the election. Police shot and killed a 27-year-old black man here in Philadelphia last week. Police are set to release their body cam video and audio of the 911 call tomorrow. About 1,000 National Guard soldiers were deployed to this city even before the election. Between the police and the National Guard, they're basically hard to miss out there tonight. Donna?
Okay, Mike Armstrong in Philadelphia, thank you. Our eyes will also be on Wisconsin and Michigan tonight.
Kentucky,
two key states Donald Trump
up.
is hoping to win in America's farming and manufacturing heartland. Donald Trump tore up NAFTA, which he claimed gave Canada an unfair advantage, and he made big promises about how a new trade deal would be a game changer. Jeff Semple looks at how the election results might impact the relationship with our largest trading partner.
Wisconsin is cow country. Home to more than 3 million cattle, the state produces as much milk as Canada's entire dairy industry.
We produce way more than this country could ever eat, so we're very dependent on the exports.
And their biggest customer is Canada.
So we have a great relationship.
In 2015, Wisconsin's lawmakers officially declared this Canada Week.
It was just a way to recognize Canadians as, important to Wisconsin.
But that relationship has now become a favorite target of President Trump.
Canada took advantage of you very much, you know that, right? Not anymore.
The new trade deal makes it easier for Wisconsin farmers to sell their products north of the border, and President Trump is milking it.
Under the USMCA, our dairy exports to Canada are expected to surge by at least 100%.
Industry experts say the president is significantly exaggerating the extent of the deal, but there's no denying the new NAFTA, which Biden also supports, hurts Canadian dairy farmers and provides a small boost to Americans.
He's the president that we need right now in the industry.
President Trump also promised to rescue the country's crumbling manufacturing sector, but many in Motor City are disappointed.
The economy was taking a tank under this man's presidency way before the pandemic.
The steelworkers plant closed last year, and the pandemic has accelerated manufacturing's decline. The two candidates offer very different visions for how to save it.
Under a Biden administration, you'll see a lot of focus on electric vehicles.
While a re-elected Trump would weaken environmental standards. That could create problems for Canada's auto sector, which is pushing to go green. Both candidates are preaching America first, but the key difference from a Canadian trade perspective, Trump is more unpredictable and more likely to see America's allies as enemies. Donna?
All right, Jeff Semple in Detroit, thank you. Well, the pandemic has affected how this election is taking place in the U.S., just as it's impacting the lives of Canadians. Nearly 3,000 new COVID-19 cases have been reported in Canada today. More than 1,000 of those are in Ontario, and that's the highest single-day tally there so far. Today, Canada's top doctor said every little thing Canadians do over the coming weeks and months could affect the spread of COVID-19, and she has new advice about masks. Mike Couture explains.
The numbers are showing us
that our window to turn this around is closing fast.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau reminding people to do their part, limit your number of contacts to the absolutely essential, and to continue wearing a mask. On that, there's a slight change. Again, Dr. Theresa Tam said the science and research has evolved, and if people wear a non-medical mask, it should be 3 layers with a filter in the middle.
Particularly important right now as we're all moving inside. I think any additional layer of protection we are now recommending.
It comes as Saskatchewan mandates masks must be worn indoors in its 3 largest cities for the next 28 days. Facing a tsunami in the second wave, Manitoba may impose a curfew for Winnipeg.
We want to halt the number, put a fence around the top of the hill, not just an ambulance at the bottom.
Ontario is easing restrictions even as the case count topped 1,000 Tuesday. The province also introduced a sliding scale of restrictions where indoor dining and gyms remain open unless there's a full provincial lockdown.
We're just trying to get back to as normal as we can.
And part of the new normal, according to Dr. Tam, is to make sure that if you have someone in your home who doesn't live with you, both of you should wear masks, even if you're able to stay 2 meters apart. Donna?
Okay, Mike in Ottawa, thank you. Back here in the U.S., a city ready for unrest. Coming up, how Portland, Oregon is preparing for potential violence. In cities across this country, including here in Washington, D.C., buildings have been boarded up and preparations made in case there is unrest on the streets. In Portland, Oregon, the National Guard is on standby. Sarah McDonald is there tonight as that city hopes for the best, but prepares for the worst.
On nearly every corner of every street, virtually all that's on display now is plywood.
What we're doing is securing our property, not only from the plywood perspective, but making sure that our dumpsters are secured and things like that. Things that could be potential weapons.
Business owners and landlords in Portland already hit hard by the pandemic. And then the protests, only further inflamed by the presence of federal agents, are now bracing for another wave of mayhem.
That is a perfect example of throwing lighter fluid on the charcoal.
Say what you want to say, but do it without destroying stuff.
Scenes of destruction in Oregon's most fiercely progressive city, only further fueling resentment among the state's Republicans, like Randy Stockwell, who insist if it weren't for demographics and geography, this Democratic stronghold would swing red.
You know, they want to say that we're white supremacists or whatever. No, we're just people that are proud to be American.
People are looking for something better, but they're not finding it in government.
It's government officials Oregonians are largely shifting blame to. Who are you? From the president meddling in municipal affairs to the Multnomah County District Attorney, who declined to prosecute 70% of all protest-related cases in Portland.
If we arrested and then jailed all of these people and held them, people with no criminal history, no records, anything else like that, but we're going to hold on to them, then we're going to have more people in the streets, not less.
As the ballots are cast and counted, this state, now under a state of emergency, is holding its breath, with citizens who've already become collateral damage once, expecting to be hit hard again. That's part of the reason the National Guard is now on standby, with federal officials keeping a close eye on this city. Oregon's governor warning state police have the power to deploy tear gas if it's deemed necessary. Donna.
Sarah McDonald in Portland, Oregon, thanks. An update on that terrorist attack Monday night in Vienna, Austria. Authorities say they now believe the suspect may have acted alone. Police say he was 20 years old and was a supporter of the so-called Islamic State. He opened fire in the heart of Vienna, killing 4 and injuring 22. Investigators say he was armed with an automatic rifle and a fake explosive vest. He was shot and killed by the police at the scene. The suspect was a dual citizen of Austria and North Macedonia who had a previous terror conviction. Police took 14 other people into custody and the investigation is ongoing. Ahead, months after George Floyd's death, what happened to promises of dismantling the Minneapolis Police Department? Police reform has become a hot button issue in this election. After the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, calls to defund the police gained momentum across the country. There's a lot of disagreement about what that means and how police forces should be reformed. Heather Yorks West is in Minneapolis tonight.
On a sunny Sunday afternoon back in June, 9 Minneapolis city councilors made a pledge that echoed around the world.
Our commitment is to end our city's toxic relationship with the Minneapolis Police Department, to end policing as we know it.
They vowed that day to dismantle the city's police department entirely, but 6 months later, that has not happened, and it likely never will.
The term "end the Minneapolis Police Department" was used multiple times.
Linnea Palmisano was one of 3 city council members not part of the pledge that day. She says while work was started to dismantle the police department, it will need to be voted on by residents, and that won't happen this year.
But the Minneapolis Police Department has experienced a dramatic change since the spring. Over 150 officers have left the service in the last few months.
It is too much, and we are severely understaffed.
The death of George Floyd put further strain on an already difficult relationship between police and residents here, and that's led to an increase in violent crime. But reimagining police work isn't new for the city either. In fact, up until last year, the city of Winnipeg had been looking at Minneapolis as a guide for improving its own public safety plan. Citizen groups like the Mad Dads are now patrolling areas 7 days a week, looking to de-escalate conflict and prevent violent crime.
Relationships. The Minneapolis Police Department doesn't have the relationships that we have.
Building relationships might be key, but it's unlikely to be easy.
One of the most important issues in this election is law and order. We say it, law and order.
Especially as the election further politicizes the issue, widening the community's divide. Heather Yurix, West Global News, Minneapolis.
Next, the power of conceding why losing candidates can help unite the country even in defeat. We're back from Washington in a moment.
The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell, weeknights at 10 on MSNBC. For breaking news in our changing world, download the NBC News app.
Welcome back. As you can see, we are less than 5 minutes away from a whole host of poll closings in the East. 16 states plus DC, including some of the big ones. Florida will also get Pennsylvania's poll closing, but Florida has already dumped a lot of vote tonight. We've already seen a lot of the results, but what we know is it's tight. Go figure. Florida.
And one of the important Sunbelt states that Chuck and others have been talking about that are going to be really key to Biden's path. Florida's going to Florida.
Yeah.
Florida's going to Florida.
All right. We want to give you a quick update of your local races now. We'll be right back. Top of the hour with those all-important 8 o'clock poll closings. You're watching Decision 2020 on NBC. Good morning. Welcome to Today. We're glad to have you with us.
This fall, we're right there with you. Whether you're back to school or back to work, we're keeping you safe. Every morning on Today.
Police murder of unarmed black men has been an American way of death across centuries. After seeing the most comprehensive police reform bill ever introduced in Congress, I've begun to wonder if now is the time. If now is the time the protesters finally win.
The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell, weeknights at 10 on MSNBC.
You ready to go to work?
I'm so ready to go to work.
She's Joe Biden's choice to be next in line. But who is Kamala Harris? Join me, Joy Reid, as I explore her life's journey from Oakland to Washington on my 6-part podcast, Kamala, Next in Line. New episodes every Monday. Subscribe for free wherever you get your podcasts.
A real close-knit group of nurses who pulled together when their boss needed help battling coronavirus.
You're not just any patient.
You're their friend.
These folks saved my life. Thank God that there are people who want to run towards a pandemic as opposed to running away from a pandemic.
Introducing the MSNBC Daily, featuring written perspectives by experts you know and trust for a better understanding of the stories that matter most. Check out the MSNBC Daily today at msnbc.com.
You're watching NBC News Now. We've got some breaking news.
Are people there concerned about what impact this could have on the election?
It's news made for your streaming world.
Watch what they do, not what they say.
President Trump and Joe Biden hit the trail center of this campaign, coronavirus story. The battleground blitz as we enter the final stretch of the 2020 race. From every angle. If you were sitting here talking to Joe Biden and President Trump, what would you want to tell them right now? On the ground.
The wind spanning these plains are expected to last another 24 hours.
And in depth. We now have 2 vaccine trials on hold. Should people be concerned?
NBC Nightly News with Les Revolt.
We're coming up 8 o'clock on the East Coast, 5 o'clock in the West, and there are a bunch of polls about to close. 16 states plus Washington, D.C., including a couple of key battlegrounds just a few seconds away. We do have some results in Kentucky. The president is the projected winner. Not a surprise there. Let's go to some other states.
Yeah, Georgia, it's too early to call. North Carolina, too early to call. Ohio, also too early to call.
And let's look at South